عجل فرجهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوسيم. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بغيت وبغي الليل والنهار. يا أبا عبد الله لقد عظمت الرزية وجلت على جميع أهل الإسلام وجلت وعظمت مصيبتك في السماوات على جميع أهل السماوات. ولعن الله أمة أسست أساس الظلم والجور عليكم أهل البيت. ولعن الله أمة دفعتكم عن مقامكم وأزالتكم عن مراتبكم التي رتبكم الله فيها. ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم ولعن الله الممهدين لهم بالتمكين من قتالكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم ومن أشياخهم وأتباعهم وأوليائهم. يا أبا عبد الله إني سلم لمن سالمكم وهرب لمن هاربكم إلى يوم القيامة. ولعن الله آل زياد وآل مروان. ولعن الله بني أمية قاطبا. ولعن الله ابن مرجان. ولعن الله عمر بن سعد. ولعن الله شمرا. ولعن الله أمة أسرجت وأنجمت وتنقبت لقتالك. بأبي أنت وأمي لقد عظم مصابي بك. فأسأل الله الذي أكرم مقامك وأكرمني بك أن يرزقني طلب ثارك مع إمام منصور من أهل بيت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم اجعلني عندك وجيها بالحسين عليه السلام في الدنيا والآخرة. يا أبا عبد الله إني أتقرب إلى الله وإلى رسوله وإلى أمير المؤمنين وإلى فاطمة وإلى الحسن وإليك بمبالاتك وبالبراءة ممن قاتلك ونسب لك الحرب وبالبراءة ممن أسس أساس الظلم والجور عليكم وأبرأ إلى الله وإلى رسوله ممن أسس أساس ذلك وبنى عليه بنيانه وجرى في ظلمه وجوره عليكم وعلى أشيائكم برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم وأتقرب إلى الله ثم إليكم بمبالاتكم ومبالاة وليكم وبالبراءة من أعدائكم والناصبين لكم الحق وبالبراءة من أشياعكم وأتباعكم إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم وبلي لمن والاكم وعدو لمن عاداكم فأسأل الله الذي يكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أوليائكم ورزقني البراءة من أعدائكم أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة وأن يثبت لي عندكم قدم صدق في الدنيا والآخرة وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله وأن يرزقني طلب ثاركم مع إمام مهدي هدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم وأسأل الله بحقكم وبالشأن الذي لكم عنده أن يعطيني بمصابيبكم أفضل ما يعطي مصابا بمصيبته مصيبة ما أعظمها وأعظم رزيتها في الإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض اللهم اجعلني في مقامي هذا ممن تناله منك صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد اللهم إن هذا يوم تبركت به بنو أمية وابن آكلة الأكباد اللعين ابن اللعين على لسانك ولسان نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله في كل موطن وموقف وقف فيه نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله اللهم لعن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية عليهم منك اللعنة أبد الآبدين وهذا يوم فرحت به آل زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله عليه اللهم فضاعف عليهم اللعن منك والعذاب الأليم اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي موقفي هذا وأيام حياتي بالبراءة منهم واللعنة عليهم وبالمبالاة لنبيك وآل نبيك عليه وعليهم السلام اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر سابق له على ذلك. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا مئة مرة. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وغلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وغدا علي بن الحسين وغدا أولاد الحسين وغلا أصحاب الحسين مئة مرة. اللهم خص أنت أول ظالم باللعن مني، وابدأ بي أولا ثم لعن الثاني ثم لعن الثاني ثم لعن الثاني والثالث والرابع. اللهم لعن يزيد خامسا، بلعن عبيد الله بن زياد وابن مرجانة وعمر بن سعد وشمران وآل أبي سفيان وآل زياد وآل مروان إلى يوم القيامة. سجده. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين، لك على مصاب الحمد لله على قديم رزيتي. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود، وثبت لي قدم صدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذين بذلوا معجهم دون الحسين عليه السلام. صلوات.
صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. We'd now like to get the program underway, and so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Hussein for tonight's speech. If you could please welcome him with the loudest salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين المنتجبين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولا يحسبن الذين كفروا أنما نملي لهم خير لأنفسهم، إنما نملي لهم ليزدادوا إثما ولهم عذاب مهين. Specifically on the topic of media, manufactured consent. And he talks about the ability of people in power, people who have control over the transfer of information, to that it can create an architecture in which your choices are predetermined. So that although there is no overt, obvious suppression of one's freedom and desires to choose freely independent of external forces, but actually you are given only a select number of choices that have been predetermined. So that whichever one of the choices that you make, it is within the designs of media convenience. And when we look at the way in which media is manipulated, one of the most important ways is in controlling the narrative. And when we talk about controlling the narrative, it more so refers to the context in which information is delivered. So not so much focusing on whether the facts that are being provided, whether they are true or false. Because when you look at most of the major world news outlets, if you look at the individual facts they deliver, they will be well sourced. They choose which facts to give, but what is more important sometimes is the framework and the context in which they deliver. And the way in which they do so, the way the narrative is controlled, that determines how the news is received by the masses. Obviously, you can't adjust for every individual person, but at least there are outside the airport in Afghanistan. Thank you very much. That when the explosion first took place, what were the headlines that we read? The most common ones out of everyone, talking about the news, the most reputable ones, BBC, Reuters, Al Jazeera, whatever background it was, 13 US soldiers killed. Initially it was 12, went up to 13, right? It didn't matter, at least initially, that more than 150 Afghani innocent civilians had been killed, because highlighting the fact that there were American soldiers that were killed, indeed we know that not all lives are equal, was more important, right? And the Malcolm X, one of the most famous civil rights campaigners, he writes about the media that you have to be careful because the media is the most powerful entity on earth, because they will have the power to make the innocent guilty and the guilty innocent, because they control the minds of the masses. So why is this important? Because when we look back at the event of Karbala itself, the narrative was perhaps the most important thing about which was being fought over. One of the reasons why Karbala is so heart-wrenching, the tragedies are so heartbreaking, is because of issues over the narrative. And when we look at Yazid ibn Muawiyah, and we look at his plans for the outcome of Karbala, we find that the narrative was very much at the front of his mind. His father, Muawiyah, was much more cunning, much more intelligent a human being, and he was much better at it. But he warned Yazid to be careful about three people, of which the most important was Imam Hussein salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. So what was his desire after what happened at Karbala had taken place? And even beforehand, what did he want to paint Karbala as? Because the facts were undeniable. So the context, the narrative that he wanted to give across to the people was there was a random group of rebels, people who were searching for power, someone who was greedy for authority. They were met in the desert, they were taken care of, and they were taken prisoner. Khalas, ma'a salama, that's it, end of story. And to a certain extent, that narrative, there was power behind it because it continues to exist in books today. I was looking at Al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya by Ibn Kathir. And when he talks about the events of this place, when he talks about Imam Hussein alayhi salam departing from Medina, he actually titles the chapter, and I quote, "The reason for his departure, Imam Hussein, from Mecca to Iraq in pursuit of power, and the cause of his death." So this was the mouthpiece to Yazid's sort of painting of the narrative, that he was greedy for power. But Imam Hussein alayhi salam was also acutely aware of the narrative as well. And he knew what political games were going to be played, not least because he is the Imam, but because he had seen what had been done to those before him. He had seen what they had done against his father, Imam Ali alayhi salam. They had seen in particular what they did against Imam Hassan alayhi salam. And of all of the propaganda against the Imams, the most enduring is probably against Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Nabi al-Hussein, in his excellent book about the history of the Nawasib surrounding Imam Ali alayhi salam, he talks about the evolution of the character of Imam Ali in historical texts. That the Umayyad oppression was so much, initially they cursed Imam Ali, they reviled him so much. It wasn't four rightfully guided Khalifas, it was only three. But as historical sources made it painfully obvious, there was a rehabilitation of his character through the historical texts. But the same can't be said about Imam Hassan alayhi salam. So he knew, Imam Hussein, he knew exactly what was going on. So even before he went out on his journey of Karbala, he planned for it. He made it extremely clear that nobody can simply put this under the dust carpets of history. That nobody can simply look at this as another skirmish, as another struggle for power. How so? When he leaves Medina, who does he take with him? He takes his family, he takes the women, he takes the children. And that is one of those undeniable facts. No matter how much you want to try and twist the narrative and fit your own agenda, the facts are undeniable. That if there was a greedy desire for power, well, a'udhu billah, it's almost painful to talk in these terms. The most efficient way would have been to get across either an armed force or even alone. This is the way Ibn Ziyad, how he got to Kufa when Yazid appointed him. He snuck in. that he had, because there were those with the Imam who also were essential in protecting the core message of Karbala, for not allowing its corruption. And the two most important individuals afterwards were Imam al-Sajjad salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh and Bibi Zainab. And Bibi Zainab, again, she knew what her role was from very early on, because when Abdullah ibn Abbas, one of the great companions of the Holy Prophet, one of the prolific narrators of ahadith, when he comes to Imam Hussein, he knows, Imam, if you leave Medina, you're going to be killed. But Imam Hussein could see far beyond what Abdullah ibn Abbas could see. Because he knew, whether I leave Medina, whether I stay, whatever happens, if I don't sell my soul to Yazid ibn Muawiyah, then death is on every doorstep. It doesn't matter where I am, Medina, Makkah, Kufa, Karbala, makes no difference. He knew that. He was looking far beyond Abdullah ibn Abbas. But Abdullah ibn Abbas, he tries with genuine counsel. He says, don't go. He sees the Imam's resolve. So Abdullah ibn Abbas, he says, fine. If you must go, go, knowing he's going to be martyred. But he said, at least leave your women and children behind. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam responded by saying, these women and children, these are the family of the Prophet. These are the amanat from Rasul al-A'zam Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa that I cannot leave them in anyone else's care. And at this point, Bibi Zainab, she came forward. Sayyid Hashim al-Bahrani, he records this in Madinat al-Ma'ajiz, that Bibi Zainab came forward and said, Ibn Abbas, with tears in her eyes, O son of Abbas, do you suggest that our leader leave us alone, venture out into the wilderness? No, by Allah, we will either live with him or die with him. We have nothing left but him. They were looking beyond. The victory of Karbala was not immediately apparent, but they were fighting against Yazid, against the propaganda machines of Syria that Muawiyah had put into place. And we'll focus tonight, of those two holy personalities, Imam al-Sajjad and Bibi Zainab, we will look more so at Bibi Zainab and the way in which she protected the message of Karbala, that she crystallized it, that allowed us today to be able to access it, was through a number of different ways. The first category of her service was through the preservation of life and her direct role in Karbala. So, for example, she saved Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam his life on at least 3 occasions. When the tents were burning and Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam was too weak, he was too sick, too ill to stand up and to get out from the tent, it was Bibi Zainab who pulled him out. On the day of Karbala, on the day of Ashura, Shimr ibn Dhil Jawshan, he came forward and he wanted to kill Imam al-Sajjad. And Hamid ibn Muslim, he says, you would even kill the sick, the young? He can't even defend himself. Shimr insisted he was going to go and kill the Imam. Bibi Zainab came forward. She threw herself atop him and said, if you're going to kill him, you're going to have to kill me first. And so powerful was this display that even someone with a heart as black as Shimr ibn Dhil Jawshan, even he looked at this spectacle and he moved away. And the third time was in the court of Ibn Ziyad. Similar happening. That after Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, and I'll quote it in a little bit more detail because again it fits the theme of the narrative. Ibn Ziyad in the court, he asks Imam al-Sajjad, how does it feel how God has killed your family? And Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, he responded by saying that it was the people who had killed him. Ibn Ziyad, he insists, no, it was God who killed him. And again, when you look at the texts that look at the details of what was said, always about the narrative. He wants to change. The facts are the same. The massacre of Karbala is obvious. But he wants to twist it to make it look like it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, he responds with the verse of the Quran, Surah Zumar, verse number 42, Allahu yatawaffa al-anfusa hina mawtiha. God receives the souls at the time of death. He was not the one who killed them. And ya subhanallah, we have both the thaqalain here. That Imam al-Sajjad, the embodiment of Ahlul Bayt, and he uses the Quran, the other of the thaqalain, of the 2 weighty things that the Prophet had issued. And at this point, Ibn Ziyad, despite sitting on his high horse, despite being in a position of apparent superiority, of victory, He had nothing in response to say. He felt humiliated in his own court, so he said, "This is the last time you will respond to me like this." Cut off his head. This is in Tarikh al-Kamil by Ibn Athir. And again, Bibi Zainab, she threw herself on top of him and said, "You won't be able to get to him until you first kill me." So by saving the life of Imam Sajjad, keeping the Imamat alive on this earth, she was so seminal, so important in the preservation of the meaning of Karbala. Because, of course, Imam Sajjad, he went on to live for 35 years afterwards, constantly keeping the remembrance of the tragedies that happened alive. And that was one way in which her heroic efforts in Karbala. The other were the ways in which she directly challenged the opponents. And she said it fearlessly to their faces, both to Ibn Ziyad in Kufa and to Yazid ibn Muawiyah in Sham. And we'll look at the sermons that she gave, a few extracts. The sermons are long, far beyond the scope of tonight's discussion alone, but they are full of meaning, some of the most powerful speeches conceivable. So she says to Ibn Ziyad, in this court, he sits on his throne, he thinks he's won. And remember the narrative of Yazid, the narrative of Ibn Ziyad, that these were troublemakers, they were nobodies, we took care of them. And she wants to reverse this. What does she say? "Do you shed tears? May your tears never dry up and your loud lamentations never cease. You are like the woman that unravels the thread that she has firmly spun. Your faith is but deceit and betrayal. Are there any amongst you except the immodest, the disgraced, the spiteful, the adulator, the enemy, the reviler? Cry endlessly and laugh little, for your deed was so horrendously disgraceful that you will never be able to atone for it. How can you wash away the crime of the murdering of the scion of the seal of the prophets, the essence of the message? The Lord of the youth of paradise, the refuge of the nobles, the refuge you sought in your affliction, the divine proof of Allah on this earth, the defenders of the prophetic tradition. What an awful sin you have committed. Away with you, for there shall be no forgiveness." What happens? She sees in Kufa, because in the people, amongst the people of Kufa, they recognize the position of the Imam. Remember, she tailors her speeches, each one carefully to the respective audience. Amongst the courtiers of Ibn Ziyad were some who recognized the position of the Imam. And she sees the sadness or the regret, the hollow regret in their eyes. And she, number one, she pays homage to the magnitude of the crime. You're not going to brush this away. You're not going to minimize it. She spells it out exactly how great a crime it is that they have committed, number one. But number two, she does the same thing that Imam Sajjad does in Yazid's court. Because she highlights that these weren't nobodies. These weren't random fugitives or criminals that were killed. This was the scion of the Prophet. This was the embodiment of his message. This was the representative of Rasulullah in that he was both the Prophet's flesh and blood, literally, and also in the way of his message. And no matter how much you twist the narrative, there's only so far you can go. And when she highlights these facts to Ibn Ziyad's face, it causes a paradigm shift. And another paradigm shift, what was it? Another way she changed the narrative. They were prisoners, right? Some were in shackles, and some were on their thrones. Some were defeated, and some were victorious, right? The way she delivers her sermon was not the way in which you expect a defeated person to speak. It was not the way you would expect a party who had been defeated to speak with such defiance, such magnitude, such glory. It was almost as if we could hear the words of Nahjul Balagha being recited. And witnesses, they said, we have not heard a sermon like this since the days of her father, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And she goes on to deliver what could be argued to be the most powerful line in all of human history. Again, Ibn Ziyad, he clutches at straws. He wants to hold some grain of humility, some form of victory that he can gain from what had happened. So, what does he say? He said, as is recorded in Al-Luhuf, how do you consider what Allah has done to your household? Again, it's supposed to be that your loss is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has punished you. And she responded with those immortal words, Ma ra'aytu illa jamila. I did not see anything but beauty. And again, she challenges them. What does this mean? The profundity of this statement, the way in which she looks past all of the horrors that have taken place. She says something that to the casual observer makes no sense. How could she possibly have witnessed such despicable crimes, such horrors, such calamities that the heavens and the earth could not take them? And yet she says she saw nothing but beauty. She shows the spirituality of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa. In the same way that Rasulullah, when he would be oppressed and they would pelt him with stones and his face would be covered in blood and his body in bruises, he would look up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recognizing that all this suffering is God's plan and that which Allah has ordained, it is nothing but beauty. This is the tawakkul, the spirituality that she introduces into the court of Ibn Ziyad, a place where it stuck out, a place where it didn't belong. And again, his narrative comes crashing down. But that was not it. The court of Ibn Ziyad, that was not the end. That was only the beginning. Because the more important sermon, the one which had even more of an impact, was delivered in the court of Yazid ibn Muawiyah. And again, a couple of extracts, and we can see the way in which she wove her words through her passion, through her emotion, through her precise logic. The way in which she turned what was supposed to be a random killing in the desert into one of the most powerful events in all of human history. What does she say to Yazid? Yazid, in his court, he wishes that his ancestors from Badr were there. And why was this important? Because it shows that it is not Banu Hashim versus Banu Umayyah. This is not a skirmish between two families with enmity. This is not two people vying for power. He wishes his ancestors from Badr were there. And we tally this with the Quran. In Surah Anfal, verse number 17, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَمْ تَقْتُلُوهُمْ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ قَتَلَهُمْ. You didn't fight them, it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that fought them, referring to the Battle of Badr. That event was so seminal, it was Islam versus Kufr. It wasn't you, Ya Rasulullah, it wasn't you, O companions of the Prophet, it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Truth and falsehood, faith and disbelief. And when he wishes his ancestors of Badr were there, he brings back that kufr, that disbelief from the Battle of Badr, from those that fell at the sword of Ali ibn Abi Talib, of the Dhul Fiqar, and he wishes they were there. So what does Bibi Zainab, she say in response? She says, O Yazid. And Yazid, his most important evidence, the reason he thought he was victorious in his own right was because, again, the same reason Ibn Ziyad thought that he had won. He was sitting on his throne, he could call the shots, and he had some what he thought were humiliated, defeated, abased, powerless prisoners in front of him. But little did he know that he had messed with Ahlul Bayt, and forever his name would be cursed throughout history. What does Bibi Zainab say? Oh Yazid, do you think it is a matter of pride for you? You captured us between the heaven and the earth and made us driven like slave mates. That this is a disgrace to us? Does this make you rejoice as you think that you have prepared the world for yourself? You imagine everything has been arranged for you and that the kingdom has been settled for you? But do not forget what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Holy Quran, the verses that I recited at the beginning. Those who disbelieve should not imagine that we have given them respite because it is good for them, but rather we have given it to them that they may add to their sins, and for them is a painful chastisement. What has she done here? She has taken the evidence which he used for his success and she shows that it is evidence for actually his folly. She goes on to say, Muawiyah and his propaganda machine, Yazid, they had thought that they had established themselves well, that they were the family of honor and Ahlul Bayt were not. She says, what hope can be entertained from the son of one who chewed the liver of the pious and whose flesh was nourished by the martyrs? You want honor? You think you sit in a position of honor as Khalif of the Muslims? I will tell everyone here what lineage you have come from, what your background is, who has given you power. O Yazid, soon you will join them on that day and wish that you had been paralyzed so you could not have done what you did and that you could not have said what you had said, but sufficient that Allah is the judge, Rasulullah is the avenger, and Jibreel is his helper. He uses the religion. He's Khalif of the Muslims, right? Even despite his statements of kufr, he's still Khalif of the Muslims. Bibi Zainab says, you even try and use Islam, I will show that Islam is your greatest enemy in this conflict. And Yazid was so terrified of this. Not only did it result in their destruction outwardly, but inwardly he was terrified. When he sent his army to Medina during his Khilafah to ransack the city, to commit crimes even within the precinct of the holy Masjid al-Nabawi, he says, leave the house of Imam al-Sajjad alone. Leave the house of Ahlul Bayt alone. Because he was terrified. He was terrified of what Imam Zain al-Abidin and what Bibi Zainab had said. She showed to us what the true measure of success was in bringing down this evil leader. And after all, she is the daughter of the queen of Quraysh. And she is also the daughter of the queen of the heavens. And she looks forward. Again, she looks at the Azadari. When she consoles the fourth Imam, what does she say? In Kamala Ziyarah, she says, do not mourn, O Sajjad, for they, referring to the Shia of Ali Muhammad, they will gather the severed limbs, the bodies that were washed in blood, and consign them to the dust. They will put a flag up for your father in the land of Ta'if, so that the symbols will never get old, they will never be forgotten, they will never disappear with the passage of time. And even when people try to destroy them, it will do nothing but to make them shine all the brighter. Gatherings like this, everyone here, everyone watching, everyone listening, in every masjid, in every place in the world where remembrance of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein takes place, it is this prophecy of Bibi Zainab. Because she rescued the narrative from those that tried to twist and those that tried to ignite. She established the majalis of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Rasulullah was the first to cry when he was given the information about Karbala. So we read in Sahih Tirmidhi and many other sources. But she was the one who established them, the remembrance of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the remembrance of what happened at Karbala. She was the one who took the victory of the Umayyads, she poisoned it, so that everything they thought they had won was actually fuel for the fire of their graves. And Islam is in a great debt to these ladies, to these great three mothers and daughters. The first, Bibi Khadija, she was the one who gave all of her wealth to the Holy Prophet. So much so that when she dies, she doesn't even have enough money for a kafan for herself. The other, her daughter, Lady Fatima Zahra, she gives her life for the message of Rasulullah. And she dies a painful death. And she is buried in the middle of the night with very few invited. That even to this day we don't know where she is buried. And indeed her daughter Bibi Zainab, she kept alive through her efforts, through her heroism in Karbala, she kept alive the lantern of the message of Karbala. We take ourselves to the aftermath of Karbala. Because what had been witnessed on those sands, what had taken place on that day was beyond reckoning. It was something that people couldn't have conceived, couldn't have imagined. For the entire day, Bibi Zainab and the women and children, they watched as the warriors, one by one, they fell. They were 3 days thirsty. They fought valiantly. One after the other, their heads were cut, their arms were severed, and eventually their bodies too were trampled. After all of these tragedies, we find Bibi Zainab in the midst of what happened in Karbala. And she is gathering the children so that they are not trampled under the hooves of the horses. She rescues those who are ablaze when their chadars are on fire. She goes to the mothers who are crying for their children. She has no time to cry for On and Muhammad because she is too busy consoling those who have lost their children. After all of this, after the night has passed, when now it comes for their journey, Bibi Zainab, when they are leaving Karbala, what does she say? She looks upon the body of her brother Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. She turns to Medina. She says, Ya Muhammad, O grandfather, here lies Hussein, covered in blood with his limbs severed, and your daughters are taken captive, and your offspring are slaughtered. So painful were these words that she shared that even the enemies, they began to cry, they began to weep because they recognized the magnitude of what they had done. And when we look at people who have lost their homes, when we look at orphans or we look at refugees, we see that they are in pain. They have left everything behind. They have lost their families. They have lost their houses. They have gone from their homeland. We treat them with respect. We treat them with empathy. But alas, there was not a shred of any of these for the descendants of Ali Muhammad, because they were paraded throughout the streets. They were taken, the household which had given us hijab, their veils were taken. They were taken in front of the enemies of Allah. They were taken in front of the drunkards. They were taken in front of the strangers, one after the other, wherever they went. They were put in the most cruel conditions. They were put atop of the camels without any saddles, so that while they were mourning emotionally for the losses of what happened at Karbala, they would, with every step of every camel, they would feel the physical pain of the continued torture. And if they cried, even if the young girls like Bibi Ruqayya or Bibi Sakina would cry, they would be met with the whip of Shemar ibn al-Dhil Jawshan. That sometimes the women, they would watch as their children fell to their deaths from their camels. Such was the plight of Ali Muhammad. And they were taken from city to city, one after the other, and there was a different reception in each. For the people would come out, they would look at the family of Ali Muhammad, and they would pelt them with stones. They would pelt them with boiling water. They would attack them in every way. They were mourning both emotionally and physically. And when they arrived in Syria, they saw the worst of it all because they were stopped outside Syria. You can't come inside Sham. Why? Because we haven't finished putting up the decorations celebrating the massacre of Ali Muhammad. They had to wait for 3 days. And after 3 days expired, they went inside of the city. And in the depths of their grief, they had to witness the celebrations of Yazid, the celebrations of Banu Umayyah. One of the companions of the Prophet, Sahal bin Suhail, he comes to Sham and he walks inside. He says, what festival is this? What celebration is this? I haven't noticed this before. An old wise man who was there, who witnessed what had happened, he came to Suhail and he says, oh Suhail, it is a majesty, it is a wonder that the heavens have not collapsed and the earth has not swallowed up its inhabitants. Suhail said, what are you talking about? Why are you saying this? He says, because this gathering, this celebration is for the cutting off of the head of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. They are celebrating because they have put the head of the grandson of Rasulullah on top of a spear. He runs towards the prisoners of Ali Muhammad. He goes to Bibi Sakina first. He says, tell me, is there anything I can do? Is there any way I can help you? She said, please, at least move the severed heads of our loved ones away from in front of us, so that the strange men will look at the heads. They will not look at us without our veils, without our purda. La'natullahi ala qawm al-zalimin. He goes to Bibi Sakina first. He says, tell me, is there anything I can do? Is there any way I can help you? She said, please, at least move the severed heads of our loved ones away from in front of us, so that the strange men will look at the heads. They will not look at us without our veils, without our
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. چه می شود که شبیم کنار ما باشی، چه می شود که شبیم کنار ما باشی، به درد عاشق بیچارت دوا باشی. رضایت دل زهراست از رضایت تو، خدا کند که همیشه ز ما رضا باشی. ابن الحسن آقا جان، خدا نیاورد آن روز را که بینم من غضب کنی و از این بینوا جدا باشی. در آن قنوت سرگه برای یک لحظه نمی شود که دعا گوی این گدا باشی. ابن الحسن آقا جان، دعا کن آقا جان، میدونم دعا میکنی، اما اینم میدونم برا گناهان منم گریه میکنی، برا گناهان شیعیانتون گریه میکنی، دو عشق میریزی. ابن الحسن آقا جان، امید غایب من ای مسافر زهرا، بلا نبینی الهی بر کجا باشی. ابن الحسن آقا جانم، کجا هستید؟ کجا خیمه عذاب پا کردید؟ کجا برا جد بزرگوارتون گریه میکنید و ماتم گرفتید ابن الحسن آقا جانم السلام علی ساکن کربلا السلام علی من على الإجابة تحت قبته السلام على من جعل الله الشفاء فيه تثبته السلام السلام على ابن خاتم الأنبياء وعلى ابن سيد الأوصياء والسلام على ابن فاطمة الزهراء السلام على المنورة في البراء لطفی که کرده ای تو به من مادرم نکرد ای مهربان تر از پدر و مادرم حسین حسین آقا جانم هر کسی تنها ذکرش می شود تنها حسین هر کسی گم می شود را می کند پیدا حسین دستگیری می کند از عاشق بی دست و پا می نشاند نوکر آلوده را بالا حسین آی قربونت برم آقا جانم آره والله اگه آبرویی دارم اگه احترام و عزتی دارم از در خانه شماست آقا جانم آی گرفتارم بگو حسین درد دوا میشه بگو حسین حاجتت روا میشه آی حاجت دارا هر جای مجلس هستی حاجاتت رو در نظر بگیر بگو حسین مریضت شفا میگیره قربونت برم آقا جان حسین جان امشب درد و دل میکنیم دردهامون رو بگیم و از شما مدد میخواهیم کار من گریه از بد تولد تا ابد سیر دیگر که ندیدم من از این دنیا حسین. خوب گریه کنیم این ایام محرم رو، انقدر محرم بیاد و بره زیر خربارها خاک باشیم و حضرت این مجالس رو بخوریم. بارها گفتم نمی بخشد ولی بخشید و گفت بار آفت خورده از را میخرد یک جا حسین. 13 نور خدا را دوست دارم مثلم، چون که میدانم در آن هست استثناء حسین. فکر دیدار خدا بودم که بین روزه ها وقت یا الله آمد بر زبانم یا حسین. هم امامت هم قیامت هم شفاعت می کند، روز محشرم بیاید کار دارم با حسین. انشاءالله آقامون ظهور میکنه و خودش انتقام کربلا رو میگیره. وقتی امام زمان ظهور میکنن این گونه خودشون رو معرفی میکنن. الا یا اهل العالم انا جدی الحسین. میتونه خودش رو با پیغمبر و امیر المؤمنین معرفی کنه، بگه انا ابن امیر المؤمنین، اما بلا فاصله انتصال خودش رو به ابی عبدالله بیان میکنه. مردم من پسر حسینم. کدوم حسین؟ ان جدی الحسین قتلوه اتشانا. اصلا برای ما سواله از خود خدا که برای انبیا روزه میخونن، این روزه آتش اشاره میشه تا خود قیامت که فاطمه زهرا سلام الله علیه میخواد روزه بخونه به این گوشه اشاره میکنه. این چه سریه که از بین این همه مصائب، از این همه مصائب ابی عبدالله، آتش ابی عبدالله از همه بیشتر گفته میشه. فرمود به آدم اگه باشی و ببینی چطوری تو گدال دست و پا میزنه، حسین جان الو ترى یا آدم فهو یقول ما تشاء قالت ناصرا. آیا جوابش میدن؟ نه والله. فلم یجدوا احدا الا بسیوف. با شمشیران تشنگیشو برطرف میکنن. حسین جان قربونت برم آقای من، بمیرم برام جادن با این روزه جون بدم برات آقا جانم. آیا جوابش میدن؟ نه والله، با شمشیر تشنگیشو برطرف میکنه. این جمله اول: الا یا اهل العالم انا جد الحسین تلحور یانا. دیگه من ترجمهش نکنم. سالهاست پای روزه ها نشستی و بزرگ شدی پای روزه. انشاءالله تو این مجالس مواریشمون سفید بشه و انشاءالله تو این مجالس جون بدیم. انقدر از بر بدنش تازاندن، آی وای وای حسین جانم آقا جانم. اون لحظه ای که خدا بزی کرد از خواهرش، اون لحظه آخر که خواهر صدا زد برادرم بیا بیا وصیت مادرم رو عملی کنم. چی بوده وصیت؟ بیا بیا ببوسم اون جایی رو که مادرم وصیت کرده، زیر گلوت رو ببوسم. ای وای ای وای ای وای لحظه جدایی رسیده. امید بیدا من میدویدم اون سوی مقتل، من سوی مقتل. می نشستم من می نشستم اون روی سینه حسین جانم، سینه ای که پیغمبر بوسه بران سینه میزد. شم لعنت الله علیه بران سینه نشد. او میبریدم من میبریدم او از حسین سر، من از حسین او می کشیدم من می کشیدم اون خنجر از گیل من از دل. هر جای مجلس نشستی صدات را آزاد کن، انشاءالله فرج امام زمان، انشاءالله این اشکا و این قدمامون روز قیامت دستگیرمون باشن. بلند صدا بزن یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین، لا لعنت الله علی القوم الظالمین. السلام علیک یا ابا عبدالله یا سیدنا المظلوم یا سیدنا الاتشام حسین.
إن كنت باكيا لشيء فابكي على الحسين، فبكى على الحسين مظلوم كربلا إن كنت باكيا لشيء فابكى على الحسين فبكى على الحسين مظلوم كربلا إن كنت باكيا لشيء فبكى على الحسين فبكى على الحسين مظلوم كربلا إن كنت باكيا لشيء فبكى على الحسين فبكى على الحسين مظلوم كربلا إن كنت باكيا لشيء فبكى على الحسين فبكى على الحسين مظلوم كربلا إن كنت باكيا لشيء فبكى على الحسين فبكى على الحسين مظلوم كربلا إن كنت باكيا لشيء فبكى على الحسين فبكى على الحسين مظلوم همه إن كنت باكيا لشيء فبكى على الحسين فبكى على الحسين مظلوم كربلا إن كنت باكيا فبكى على الحسين فبكى على الحسين مظلوم إن كنت باكيا لشيء فبكى على الحسين فبكى على لا تا آخرین نفس در بیعت تویی تا آخرین نفس در بیعت تویی ای عشق ما حسین ما نوکر توییم تا آخرین نفس در بیعت توییم تا آخرین در بیعت توییم ای عشق ما حسین ما نوکر توییم إن كنت باكيا لشيء فبكى على الحسين فبكى على الحسين إن كنت باكيا لشيء فبكى على الحسين فبكى على الحسين مظلوم كربلا إن كنت باكيا حسين فبكى على الحسين مظلوم در سختی و بلا درمان ما تویی در سختی و بلا درمان ما تویی در قحطی یقین ایمان ما تویی در سختی و بلا درمان ما تویی در سختی و بلا درمان ما تویی در قحطی یقین ایمان ما تویی إن كنت باكيا لشيء فبكى على الحسين فبكى على الحسين مظلوم إن باكي الشاي فابكي على الحسين در قحطی زمین در غربت زمان در قحطی زمین در غربت زمان دل خوش به گریه ایم در زیر آسمان ان کنت باکی الشی فابکی علی الحسین فابکی علی الحسین مظلوم کربلا ان کنت باکی يا أول الهوى أبكيت آدم يا أول الهوى أبكيت آدم يا ملة الدموع في عين فاطمة إن كنت باكيا لشيء فابكي على الحسين فابكي على الحسين مظلوم كربلاء إن كنت باكيا فابكي على الحسين فابكي على الحسين مظلوم صلى عليك من أوحى إلى النبي صلى عليك من أوحى إلى النبي والغار أسبحه تلا لزينبي إن كنت باكيا لشيء فابكي على الحسين فابكي على الحسين مظلوم إن كنت باكيا لشيء فابكي على الحسين فابكي على الحسين مظلوم مظلوم کربلا مظلوم کربلا مظلوم کربلا سيدنا المظلوم سيدنا العطشان سيدنا القريب حسين 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 سيدنا المظلوم سيدنا العطشان سيدنا القريب حسين 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 سيدنا المظلوم
سيدنا الغريب حسين 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 سيدنا المظلوم سيدنا العطشان سيدنا الغريب حسين حسين حسین جلوی آینه خودمو میبینم خیلی تغییر کردم جدی جدی با روزه های تو خودمو پیر کردم باور من اینه که همیشه تو زندگیمی من عوض شدم ولی تو حسین بچگی من عوض شدم ولی تو حسین حواست هست به موهای سفید سرم چقدر امسال از گذشته شکست ترم حواست هست نوکرت داره پیر میشه بخرم ببرم به حرم داره دیر میشه دوست دارم دوست دارم دوست دارم ارباب دوست دارم دوست دارم دوست دارم باور من اینه که همیشه تو زندگی من عوض شدم ولی تو حسین بچگی من عوض شدم ولی تو حسین بچگی حواست هست به موهای سفید سرم چقدر امسال از گذشته شکست ترم حواست هست نوکرت داره پیر میشه بخرم ببرم به حرم داره دیر میشه دوست دارم دوست دارم دوست دارم ارباب دوست دارم دوست دارم دوست دارم هر که به دنیا کند گریه برای حسین هر که به دنیا کند گریه برای حسین 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 اول فضل اول فضل بگو اول فضل اول فضل اول فضل یا زهرا یا زهرا یا زهرا یا زهرا یا زهرا یا زهرا یا حیدر یا حیدر یا حیدر یا حیدر 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 به جز حیدر کسی شیر خدا نیست اسد الله القول اسد الله القول علی بن ابی طالب علی بن ابی طالب ولی الله العظم ولی الله العظم صفا مکه زمزم صدنا لیلة العذراء غالب اعلی الاعداء اهلی والی والو اهلی والی علو والی والو اهلی عین یعین حبل الله المتین حبل الله المتین حیدر 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 اهلی 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 اسد الله الغالب اهلی بن ابی طالب اسد الله الغالب اهلی بن ابی طالب اهلی 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 اسد الله ولی الله عين الله روح الله يد الله سيف الله باب الله وزن الله روح الله روح الله روح الله روح أحلي 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 يا مهدي يا مهدي يا مهدي يا مهدي يا مهدي يا مهدي ما شاء الله يا مهدي صلوات
شبی میان همین روزه ها قبولم کن شبی میان همین روزه ها قبولم کن به حرمت غم آل عبا قبولم کن درون سینه من حب مرتضی جاریست درون سینه من حب مرتضی جاریست یه قسمی بدیم به حق فاطمه و به حق فاطمه و مرتضی قبولم کن برای این که به وصل تو دل برسم گذاشتم همه را زیر پا قبولم کن ز لطف بی حدت آقا که کم نمی آید بیا کرم کن و این دفعه را قبولم کن بچه ها بزرگ شدن جوونا پیر شدن پیرها رفتن خیلی ها دوست داشتن چشمشون به جمال آقا امام زمان روشن بشه ترس منم از زمین بمیرم و روی زیبای یوسف زهرا رو نبینم ز لطف بی عدد آقا که کم نمی آید بیا کرم کن و این دفعه را قبولم کن گناه کردم آقا ببخش شرمنده قبول من بدم اما شما قبولم کن سلام منتقمه کشته های دشت منام به قربت شهدای منا قبولم کن، به حق آن شهدایی که تشنه جان دادن، شبیه تشنه لب کربلا قبولم کن. به ناله های جگرسوز حضرت باقر، به روزخان غم نینوا قبولم کن، به لحظه های پر از ماجرای کوفه و شام، به رأس رفته روی نیزه ها قبولم کن. حسین آرام جانم، حسین رو روانم، حسین رو روانم. الهی بالحسین الهی الحق، الهی الحق، الهی الحق. خدایا به حق اشکایی که در روزه های امام حسین مجالس از گونه های ما جاری میشه، به حق موهایی که سفید میشه تو این مجالس، به حق پیر غلامان و نوکرای خالص امام حسین علیه السلام، قلم عفو بر گناهان همه ما بکش. خدایا تأکید در امام زمان ما قرار بده. اللهم عجل ولیک الفرج، اللهم عجل ولیک الفرج، اللهم عجل ولیک الفرج. تعجیل در فرج امام زمان، برآورده شدن حاجات، شفا همه مریضان سفارش شده مد نظر، همه گذشتگان و اموات، مادرای نغیر، همه پیر غلاما، همه کسانی که در بین ما بودند و دستشون از این دنیا کوتاه شد، آج آقای کیومرثی، آج آقای مجیدی، همه رفتگانم وات جمع فیض ببرن انشاءالله. اعوذ بالله من الشیطان الرجیم. اما یجیب المضطر اذا دعا و یکشف السوء، 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 اما یجیب المضطر اذا دعا و یکشف السوء. حاج آقا بفرمایید.
نسألك اللهم وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم العز الأجل الأكرم بدماء شهدائنا يا الله 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 يا رحمن يا رحيم يا حميد بحق محمد، يا عالي بحق علي، يا فاطر بحق فاطمة، يا محسن بحق الحسن، يا قديم الإحسان بحق الحسين. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج، اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج، واجعلنا من خير أعوانه وأنصاره. اللهم ارزقنا رزقا حلالا طيبا واسعا. اللهم اغفر لحينا وميتنا. اللهم احينا حياة محمد وآل محمد. اللهم أمتنا ممات محمد وآل محمد، واجعل عواقب أمورنا خيرا. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.